Have you ever stayed silent in a moment when you knew you should have spoken up? Not because you didn't know what to say, but because you were afraid. Afraid of how others might react, afraid of getting into trouble, and afraid of being judged. Then you turned your back and walked away. But that feeling didn't fade. It lingered within you, like a question that was never answered. What if I had dared to speak up at that moment? We often believe that silence is a way to preserve peace. But there are times when silence doesn't make things any more peaceful. It only allows what is wrong to continue and leaves what is right completely unprotected. The Stoics never taught us to speak often, but they did teach us to be courageous, and that there are truths which need to be spoken, even when they're uncomfortable. Because there are moments when, if you don't raise your voice, you don't just miss the chance to change something out there, you begin to lose a part of your true self from within. So if you've ever walked away knowing you left something unsaid, stay with me. What comes next isn't noise, it's purpose. And if it strikes something within you, subscribe and share your story below. You're not alone in this. Stoicism begins when silence ends. 1. When someone is being treated unfairly in front of you, you don't need to throw a punch to fight injustice. Sometimes all it takes is refusing to look away. Yet too often we do. We fold our hands, lower our gaze, and call it neutrality. But in truth, silence in the face of wrongdoing isn't noble. It's silent agreement. When someone is mistreated in front of you, your reaction reveals not just who you are in that moment, but what kind of world you're helping to build. And the Stoic doesn't pretend neutrality is wisdom when morality is on the line. Unfairness is rarely loud. It doesn't always look like oppression or abuse. Sometimes it's as subtle as a colleague getting blamed for a mistake they didn't make, a cashier being humiliated for something out of their control, or a quiet worker being ignored while someone else steals their credit. And in those moments, when your conscience stirs but your voice stays buried, you're not avoiding conflict, you're avoiding yourself. Because a man who walks away from truth to stay comfortable is walking away from his own strength. Stoicism isn't about detachment from justice, it's about clarity of action. You don't act because you want to be right. You act because not acting costs you your peace. We often tell ourselves we're being calm, collected, or above the drama. But that's not calm. That's calculated self-preservation at the expense of someone else's dignity. True calm is the strength to say what needs to be said, without pride, without ego, without spectacle. Just the truth. Just presence. And yes, there's risk. You might be questioned, you might make things awkward. But if you're stoic in thought, you must also be stoic in deed. That means aligning what you see with what you stand for. Imagine the ripple effect when just one voice says, "That's not fair." The energy in the room shifts. It doesn't have to be dramatic. It only needs to be real. In a world that punishes courage and rewards silence, even a sentence spoken with integrity is a form of quiet rebellion. It doesn't make you righteous. It makes you responsible. We are not disturbed by events, but by our judgment of them. Yet judgment that sees wrong and remains still isn't judgment. It's indifference wrapped in cowardice. You don't have to shame the wrongdoer. You don't even have to take sides. But if you claim to live with virtue, you can't hide behind comfort. You must learn to stand inside the discomfort of doing what's right, especially when it costs you something. That's where your inner strength is forged. Not when life is easy, but when the moment is heavy and you lift it anyway. This is where Stoicism breathes, not in theory, but in action. Not in grand declarations, but in the small moments no one sees, when you choose principle over passivity. You're not being called to fix the world. You're being called not to betray it. Because the world isn't broken by evil alone. It's broken when good people decide the truth is too inconvenient to speak. If someone is being humiliated and all you do is stay silent, then don't call that self-control. Call it what it is, fear disguised as poise. But courage doesn't always shout. Often it speaks quietly, but at the exact moment, most people choose to be quiet. And the strength to say one true sentence in the face of unfairness is greater than hours of reflection that lead to nothing. Ask yourself this: do you want to be the person who remembers what they should have said? Or the one who remembers they said it? Because in the quiet aftermath of these moments, Only one of those brings peace. The Stoic doesn't speak for applause. He speaks because virtue demands it. And virtue isn't a thought, it's a practice, a choice made again and again, even when it would be easier to walk away. Even when the stakes seem small, especially then. If you're present when someone is being treated unfairly and you do nothing, you're teaching yourself that your comfort matters more than your character. But if you say just one thing, not to embarrass, not to argue, just to honor what's right, you change the meaning of the moment. And more than that, you reclaim a part of yourself that would have been lost in the silence. This isn't about being loud, it's about being true. Let others shrink from the truth. You stand with it, you live with it. Because when you refuse to stay silent in the face of what's wrong, you don't just protect someone else's dignity, you protect your own. And that, above all else, is the Stoic way. 2. When people make fun of your values or beliefs, mockery doesn't always sound cruel. Sometimes it hides behind laughter. It shows up in subtle digs, sarcastic remarks, or sideways glances. And when the target is your discipline, your restraint, your beliefs, what you've built slowly and silently within, you're not just being teased, you're being tested. The moment you laugh with them to fit in or stay quiet to keep the peace, you're not showing humility. You're surrendering authorship over who you are. A Stoic doesn't seek validation in the eyes of others. He lives aligned with reason, not approval. It's easy to hold your principles when no one is watching. But true character reveals itself when those principles are challenged, especially in casual, everyday moments. You're in a group of friends. They joke about something you find degrading. They tease you for being too serious, too quiet, too disciplined. You smile to keep things light, but later, something gnaws at you. It's not their words, it's your silence. Because the part of you that wanted to speak, the part that felt it wasn't right, was ignored. And every time you do that, you lose more than the moment. You lose trust in yourself. I've been there. I was invited to a gathering where everyone started joking about people who live too clean. No alcohol, no indulgence, early mornings, routines. I matched their smiles, deflected their jokes. I said nothing when my lifestyle became the punchline. But that night, I couldn't sleep. I wasn't angry at them. I was disappointed in myself. Not because I should have lectured anyone, but because I didn't even defend my own peace. I let their words shape the room, while mine stayed buried in my throat. That is not Stoic restraint. That is passive betrayal. Stoicism teaches us to live in accordance with nature, which means in accordance with reason and integrity. If you know something is right for you, if you've chosen a path after careful thought, then letting others laugh it into silence means your reason bends under pressure. And what bends too easily breaks eventually. Not loudly, quietly. You won't notice it at first, but one day you'll stop showing up as yourself and start showing up as a version of you they'll find easier to accept. You don't have to fight mockery with force. You don't have to defend your values with essays. You only need to remain unmoved, and if a response is needed, keep it brief and steady. That's not really my thing. I just prefer a simpler rhythm. It works for me. These aren't comebacks. They're anchors. They keep you centered when others try to pull you off course. What most people fear isn't being different, it's being seen as different. And that fear makes us shrink. But Stoicism calls us to expand, not to dominate others, but to become undisturbed by their noise. There's a quiet kind of strength in holding your position when others try to shake it, not to prove them wrong, but to prove to yourself that you no longer need their permission to live your truth. Let's be honest, most people don't mock you because your values are wrong. They mock because your discipline exposes their distractions. Your clarity reflects their confusion. Your silence reminds them of the noise they drown in, so they laugh, they poke, they pull. But the Stoic stands still, not because he's stubborn, but because he's already chosen. And once a man chooses his way with reason, he doesn't let shallow opinions steer his path. In a world obsessed with pleasing, a man who doesn't flinch becomes magnetic. He doesn't need to explain. His energy speaks. People may mock you at first, but deep down, they respect you more than those who fold. They test you to see if you'll fall. But when you don't, they stop laughing. They start watching. And maybe, one day, they follow. This is why your silence matters. Not the silence that hides your truth, but the silence that says, "You can say what you want, I won't be moved." That kind of silence is not weakness. It's strength without noise, power without force, and presence without apology. When people make fun of your values, they are not attacking you. They are resisting a standard you've chosen that threatens their comfort of. You don't need to convert them. Just don't abandon yourself. You don't owe the world your explanations, but you do owe yourself your loyalty. Because in the end, you're not here to be agreeable. You're here to be authentic. And a man who lives according to principle, even when others don't understand, is not just practicing Stoicism. He's embodying it. Let others laugh. You walk your path, quietly, steadily, and with your head held high, not in pride, but in peace. 3. When someone spreads lies and nobody corrects them, falsehood doesn't need force to thrive. It just needs silence. And once it takes root, unquestioned, unchallenged, it doesn't simply linger. It becomes accepted. It hardens into public opinion, filters into group memory, and turns into a version of reality that's easier to repeat than to question. What starts as distortion ends as doctrine. And the more people remain quiet, the more truth gets buried beneath convenience. Lies are rarely shouted by villains. They're passed off subtly, wrapped in a casual tone, delivered with confidence. A twisted version of what happened in the meeting, a one-sided retelling of a conversation, a number massaged just enough to appear clean. These things don't feel dangerous in the moment. That's why they spread. But each time a lie replaces the truth, even slightly, it alters what people trust. And what people trust becomes what people follow. In a workplace, a manager once made a mistake that cost the team a client. Instead of owning it, he casually implied the intern hadn't handled the follow-up correctly. He didn't say it directly, he just let the assumption hang. People nodded. The intern stayed quiet. So did everyone else. The truth sat there, ignored, while the lie quietly filled the space. No one wanted to start trouble. But no one seemed to notice the damage was already done. Not just to that young intern's reputation, but to the integrity of the entire room. What's worse than a lie told is a lie aloud. Because it's not the speaker that gives it power, it's the audience that refuses to interrupt it. And while it may feel like you're preserving peace by not speaking, you're actually creating a fragile illusion, one that comes at the expense of someone else's dignity or your own. Stoicism doesn't demand we react emotionally to deception. It teaches us to see clearly, to act with precision, and to detach from the fear of disapproval. When someone spreads falsehoods, you don't need to shout, argue, or prove yourself right. You only need to anchor yourself to what you know is real. A simple sentence can be enough. Actually, I think that might be inaccurate. There's more to that story. I remember it a little differently. These aren't confrontations. They are corrections, spoken with calm, backed by clarity. We often avoid speaking up because we think it must come with conflict. But the real conflict lives inside when we don't. You walk away from those moments unsettled, not because of what was said, but because of what you allowed. And over time, that silence doesn't feel like protection. It feels like regret. You begin to question your own strength. You start accepting things you once knew were wrong. And the worst part? You train yourself to value comfort more than truth. A Stoic lives in alignment with what is true, not because it's easy, but because it's essential. If you betray truth to fit in, you will lose yourself in the process. Integrity doesn't shout. It doesn't need to. But it also doesn't hide when the air gets heavy. It stands, even if alone. And that's where your inner stillness is tested. Not in meditation, but in moments of tension when silence would be easier. When you're in a room where falsehood is dressed up as fact and no one speaks, that room doesn't need another voice to win an argument. It needs one voice to break the illusion. You don't need to convert the crowd. You just need to remind yourself that your voice is still yours, that it hasn't been sold off for approval or convenience. Because once you start staying silent in those moments, you begin to disappear from your own life. You may not change anyone's mind. That's not the point. The point is not to lose yours. The Stoic doesn't speak to dominate, he speaks to remain whole. He doesn't correct because he's offended. He corrects because falsehood, when unchallenged, becomes normalized. And what becomes normal shapes what's expected. And what's expected soon becomes unspoken law. That's how small lies evolve into massive distortions. not in one moment, but over many small silences. The mind that values stillness must also value truth. And truth, unlike lies, doesn't force itself on others. It doesn't manipulate. It waits. It stands. And it needs only one person to echo it for it to start breathing again. That person may be you. Not because you're the loudest, but because you're the only one willing to stay aligned when the room drifts. What's left unspoken often costs more than what's said with calm conviction. So when lies begin to pass as truth and everyone nods just to move on, ask yourself quietly, do I want to walk out of this room still respecting the person who walked in? Because sometimes all it takes to shift the energy is a steady voice. Not louder, just anchored. And in a world full of rehearsed deception, that voice, anchored in stillness, becomes the rarest form of power. 4. When someone you love is going down a dangerous path. When someone you love begins to drift, you feel it before you see it. The energy changes, their voice loses warmth, their eyes stop meeting yours. At first it's subtle, missed calls, sudden mood shifts, long nights unspoken for. But soon it's harder to ignore. The drinking becomes frequent, the relationships become volatile, the silence grows longer. And in those moments, silence isn't compassion. It's fear pretending to be respect. You don't want to upset them. You don't want to be pushed away. So you say nothing, hoping they'll find their way back on their own. But the truth is, most people don't spiral because no one cares. They spiral because the people who care are too afraid to speak. You cannot control another person's choices, no matter how much you love them. But love isn't about control, it's about presence. And presence isn't measured in how close you sit to someone. It's measured in how willing you are to see their pain, name it, and still stand beside them. Stoicism doesn't ask us to fix people. It asks us to act from reason, not emotion, from love, not fear. You can be detached from outcomes and still be deeply connected to someone suffering. The Stoic does not harden his heart. He opens it without losing himself inside it. Imagine your younger brother starts staying out late, sleeping during the day, and avoiding the family. You notice the change. You feel the distance. You hear the denial in his voice. I'm fine, I just need space. You want to believe him, but the gut knows. You're not being nosy. You're being responsible. Not responsible for his life, but for your own integrity in how you show up for it. So you speak. Not to accuse, not to shame, but to express the quiet truth. You haven't seemed like yourself lately. I'm here whenever you're ready. That sentence, spoken without judgment, might be the lifeline they didn't know they needed. And if it isn't, you still did what a Stoic does. You acted with intention, not impulse. There's this illusion that silence preserves the relationship. But what it really preserves is distance. You may avoid the argument, the pushback, the discomfort. But what grows in that silence is regret, the kind that lingers long after the person has fallen too far to hear you. Speaking up might cause tension, but not speaking may cause loss. And that loss will sit in your chest longer than any uncomfortable moment ever will. When someone is walking into darkness, your voice can be the reminder that they're still seen. Not fixed, not analyzed, just seen. Stoicism teaches that our role isn't to rescue, it's to remain stable while others shake, to offer a calm presence when the world becomes chaotic, to extend a hand, not a command. That's real emotional courage. Not dramatic interventions, but steady truth spoken from love, not ego. And still you might not be heard. They might lash out. They might say you're overreacting. But silence doesn't make that less likely. It just delays it. And when the breakdown finally comes, what will you say? That you saw it coming but chose not to speak? That you didn't want to upset them? That you waited for a better time that never arrived? If your words could open one door, one thought, one pause in their path, wouldn't that be worth the risk? There are quiet forms of collapse: apathy, bitterness, and resentment. A partner who no longer dreams, a parent who only speaks in regret, a friend who shuts down piece by piece. These aren't loud cries for help. They're slow fades. And in those moments, your silence becomes a mirror of the world they already feel invisible in. To say nothing is to confirm what their inner voice already fears. No one notices. No one cares. So speak, gently, steadily, without an agenda. Say, I miss the way you used to light up. Say, I know things feel heavy. I see you trying. Say anything that reminds them they're not walking alone. This isn't about being right. It's about not disappearing. Your voice, when anchored in reason and love, becomes a light, not to blind, but to guide. You might not pull them out of the storm, but you can be the lighthouse they remember when they're ready to swim back. Don't let the fear of tension keep you silent. Don't wait for the moment to feel perfect. Life rarely gives us the timing we want. It gives us windows, small cracks where truth can enter. And when you see someone you love slipping through those cracks, don't waste time wondering if you should say something. You already know the answer. The discomfort of speaking fades. The cost of silence doesn't. Speak, not to rescue, but to remain human. Speak, not to change them, but to stay true to you. Because the Stoic path is not just about controlling yourself. It's about refusing to abandon those you love when they need your steadiness most. Even if your voice shakes, even if they don't hear it, what matters is that you spoke when it counted. And you'll carry that peace far longer than the silence you almost chose. 5. When you're afraid to speak the truth, but you know you should. There are moments when the truth burns inside you. Not as opinion, not as preference, but as something deeply known. You feel it in your chest, it tightens in your throat, and yet you don't say it. Not because you doubt the truth, but because fear steps in first. Fear of being misunderstood, fear of losing your place, fear of judgment, conflict, or rejection. And so you hold back thinking silence will protect you. But silence doesn't protect your peace. It only postpones your unrest. The mind convinces itself that the cost of truth is too high, that now isn't the time, that maybe someone else will speak, but you already know they won't. And the longer you wait, the heavier it gets. Not the situation, but the weight of your own silence. This is not about shouting. This is not about being the loudest. It's about refusing to abandon your conscience when it calls you to act. Stoicism doesn't ask you to fight every battle, but it demands that you remain whole within yourself. When you know what is right and you say nothing, you fragment your integrity. You begin to train yourself to betray what's true in exchange for what's safe. And that exchange always comes at a cost. The first time, it's small, just a missed word. Next, it's easier to stay quiet. Soon, silence becomes your default, not out of wisdom, but out of habit. Fear is clever. It doesn't scream, it whispers. It tells you that keeping quiet is mature, that timing matters, and that rocking the boat will only make things worse. But what if the boat is already sinking, and you're the only one holding a rope? Stoicism reminds us that courage isn't about having no fear. It's about not letting fear dictate your actions. And truth, when spoken with calm and clarity, is an act of courage, not because it wins arguments, but because it keeps you aligned. You don't need to be forceful. You need to be grounded. You don't need to change minds. You need to be faithful to yours. The truth doesn't always fix things in the moment. Sometimes it complicates them. But it protects something more important, your self-respect. The man who speaks with honesty, not hostility, may not be liked, but he will not be lost. And that's a trade worth making. There will always be reasons to wait. The conversation isn't right. The setting feels off. The person may not listen. But none of those excuses change the fact that your silence is becoming the loudest statement in the room. When you fail to speak the truth, you let others define what's real. You let narratives form that you know are false. And in doing so, you leave the truth alone, not just in the world, but within yourself. A Stoic doesn't rush to speak, but when he does, it's with purpose. Not to dominate, but to clarify. Not to impose, but to stand. Truth spoken without ego is not aggressive. It's steady. It's unmoved. It does not need applause. It simply refuses to disappear. You owe that to yourself. Because the man who looks back on his life and remembers the moments he stayed silent in fear is a man who will always wonder who he could have been if he had chosen courage. When you feel that inner pull, the quiet knowing that you're meant to say something, don't negotiate with fear. Don't wait until your confidence is perfect. Speak anyway, even if your voice is quiet, even if your hands shake. What matters most isn't the reaction of others, it's that you didn't let fear define your response. Every time you choose courage over comfort, you sharpen the blade of your character. And that blade is what cuts through the fog when life gets difficult. There are truths only you can speak, not because others don't see them, but because they haven't yet found the strength. And maybe your words won't change everything. Maybe they won't be heard, but maybe, just maybe, they'll be remembered. And that memory becomes a turning point, if not for them, then for you. So when you know the truth and fear tells you to wait, ask yourself, what kind of man do I want to be when this moment passes? Because it will pass, and what will remain is the choice you made. Speak, not for praise, not for attention, but because you owe it to the part of you that still believes your voice is meant for more than silence. You don't speak because it's easy, you speak because it's honest. You don't speak because it's safe, you speak because you refuse to live in contradiction. And that, in the end, is what gives you peace. The kind of peace that no one can give you, and no one can take away. 6. When your silence protects the wrong people. There's a kind of silence that feels like safety, until you realize it's been protecting the wrong side. You see someone in power constantly shifting blame to others. You know the pattern. Every time something goes wrong, the target is someone who can't defend themselves. Everyone notices, no one speaks. You don't either. You tell yourself you're staying neutral, minding your business. But deep down, you know that kind of silence isn't harmless. It's permission. Some people rise in toxic systems not because they're competent, but because they've learned to weaponize the silence around them. They thrive on collective hesitation. The fewer people who speak up, the more control they gain. Their authority isn't earned, it's borrowed from the fear of others. And every time someone chooses not to interfere, they grow bolder. They don't need applause. They just need quiet corridors. That's where manipulation breathes best, in rooms where no one wants to be the one who speaks first. Stoicism is not a philosophy of avoidance. It doesn't teach us to stay uninvolved. It teaches us to act from reason, with discipline, when our conscience is clear. When we see wrongdoing and remain silent, not because we don't know what's happening, but because we fear what might follow, we are no longer innocent bystanders. We are part of the design that keeps the injustice alive. And that truth is uncomfortable, but essential. You don't have to confront the entire system. You don't need to be loud. But if you see behavior that corrodes integrity, whether it's dishonesty, exploitation, or subtle cruelty, and say nothing, then your silence will slowly corrode you too. Not instantly, but over time, you'll feel the disconnect between what you see and what you stand for, between who you are and who you act like. And that distance becomes exhausting. We often think it's wise to pick our battles, and in many cases that's true. But some battles pick you, not because you chose them, but because you were present when a line was crossed. And in those moments, neutrality is an illusion. You're either standing for something or stepping aside so someone else can continue unchecked. Stoicism reminds us, if it's not right, don't do it. But it also implies the inverse. If it's wrong, don't enable it, even passively, even silently. People don't always remember what you said, but they remember if you stood by and let harm happen, especially those on the receiving end. When they see that no one spoke up for them, they learn to expect less from people, less truth, less protection, less decency, and the world shrinks because of it. Your voice doesn't need to be dramatic. It can be measured, direct. I think we should double-check before pointing fingers. That doesn't seem fair. Let's not jump to conclusions. These are not accusations. They are boundaries. Spoke not to attack, but to preserve clarity in rooms where fear clouds it. This kind of speech doesn't fracture trust, it builds it, because it reminds others that not everyone is afraid of doing what's right, even when it's inconvenient. We live in a culture that rewards image, that often punishes truth when it disrupts the status quo. And that's why so many stay quiet. They fear being isolated, targeted, and misunderstood. But when your silence shelters abuse, whether personal, professional, or systemic, you're not protecting yourself, you're participating, even if passively. And that's the kind of regret that doesn't go away easily. A Stoic doesn't act out of impulse, but he also doesn't wait until the moment is perfect. He speaks when the principle demands it, even if it shakes the room, even if it costs him something, not because he wants to be seen, but because he refuses to look away. The next time you witness someone being thrown under the bus for another person's mistake, ask yourself, if I don't say something now, what am I agreeing to? Because every silence is an agreement, either with your values or against them. And when enough good people choose comfort over courage, The wrong people write the rules. They stay in power. They redefine truth. They turn entire cultures toxic, one unchecked moment at a time. That's not their fault alone. That's the fault of the silence that let them go unchallenged. You don't need to be the hero, but you do need to be honest. Say the quiet thing, clearly, without drama, without ego. Speak not because you want to change the world, but because you refuse to be changed by fear. Let them misjudge you. Let them be uncomfortable, but don't let them think you didn't see, or worse, that you didn't care. Because once you start biting your tongue to protect the wrong people, it gets harder to speak at all. And soon, the person you protect most is not them, but the version of yourself that would rather be liked than respected. Don't trade clarity for comfort. Don't trade conscience for silence. When you protect what's wrong, you turn against what's right within you. And that's a weight even time can't shake off. Speak calmly. Speak with precision. But speak, even if your voice is the only one in the room. Especially then. 7. When not speaking will leave you full of regret. There are things we carry not because they happened, but because we never said what we should have when they did. A simple sentence unsaid. A truth left waiting. A moment that came and went, and left a silence that's louder now than any words could have been. We tell ourselves we'll say it tomorrow, that there'll be a better time. But time is indifferent, and life doesn't wait for us to feel ready. It moves forward, with or without our voice. You knew what needed to be said. I'm sorry. I forgive you. I was wrong. I miss you. Thank you. I love you. These words don't require perfect timing. They require presence. And the cost of not saying them isn't visible at first. It shows up later, when the opportunity is gone, when the person is no longer there, or when the silence between you has grown too wide to cross. That's when regret sets in. Not because something bad happened, but because you chose stillness over sincerity. Regret is not about what others did, it's about what we didn't do. And the most haunting kind of regret is the kind that could have been prevented with one sentence, one phone call, one moment of courage. But we waited, out of pride, out of fear, out of habit. Stoicism reminds us that life is short, fragile, and never guaranteed. Memento mori, remember that you will die, not to depress you, but to sharpen your focus. So that the words that matter don't stay trapped behind excuses that feel rational in the moment, but hollow in hindsight. You don't need a grand gesture to repair something real. You just need to stop pretending that silence is neutral. It's not. When you withhold what matters, you're not avoiding harm, you're creating distance. Emotional distance that hardens over time. Stoicism isn't about suppressing your feelings, it's about using them wisely. And there's nothing wise about carrying words you were meant to release. We often think that speaking up will make things worse. That being vulnerable is a weakness, but vulnerability, guided by clarity, is strength in its purest form. You don't speak to control how others react. You speak to stay in alignment with your own character. To live without the burden of unsaid truths. Because when your head hits the pillow, what weighs most isn't what others thought of you. It's what you know you should have said, and didn't. There are no guarantees you'll be understood. There's no promise they'll respond the way you hope. But that's not your responsibility. Your task is to speak what's true for you before time makes that truth irrelevant. The Stoic doesn't wait for perfection. He doesn't wait for permission. He doesn't hide behind someday. He acts while he still can. Not for outcome, but for peace. Not to be heard, but to remain honest. You might tell yourself you'll get another chance, that you'll say it next time. But some doors don't stay open, and when they close, they don't make a sound. You just realize one day that you've run out of moments, and the silence left behind becomes permanent. It becomes part of who you are, and it's heavy. Heavier than the fear that held you back in the first place. So don't wait for the right words. Say the true ones. Don't wait for the perfect mood. Say what matters when it arises. If you feel it, speak it. If it's lingering, it's probably needed, not to fix everything, but to free you from the weight of avoidance. Living with emotional clarity doesn't mean talking endlessly. It means not hiding when something honest is asking to be heard. We all lose people, some through death, some through silence. And when they're gone, what hurts most is not the goodbye, it's the "I wish I had said" that follows. Those words become memories that ache. they become reflections that sting. And the only way to prevent them is to stop choosing fear over presence. Speak calmly. Speak with care. Speak not for drama, but for dignity. Say what you need to say, not because it guarantees peace with others, but because it guarantees peace within. The Stoic life isn't about emotional distance. It's about emotional integrity. And emotional integrity means not waiting until life forces your silence to become permanent. So ask yourself right now, who needs to hear from you? What truth have you been sitting on, convincing yourself that it can wait? If this were your last chance, would you still delay? Because one day it will be. And the only thing worse than speaking too late is never speaking at all. Say it. Not because it's easy, but because silence has already taken too much from you. In a world that often rewards silence and punishes conviction, learning when to speak is a form of moral discipline. Not every situation demands your voice, but some moments do. And staying silent in those moments will cost you more than discomfort. It will cost you yourself. The Stoic path isn't about being loud, it's about being aligned. Speaking with integrity, even when your voice shakes, is not about pride, it's about clarity. Throughout this journey, you've seen how silence, when misplaced, can protect lies, enable injustice, and erode the truth. You've seen how fear often disguises itself as restraint, and how inaction is sometimes the most damaging choice of all. Stoicism calls us not to react impulsively, but to respond with precision and presence. When something is wrong, we don't look away. When something matters, we don't delay. These 7 situations are not theoretical. They happen every day. They unfold in offices, in homes, in friendships, and in silence that should have been interrupted. So take this as your reminder. Your voice, when guided by courage and reason, can restore balance, uphold dignity, and bring peace, not only to others, but to yourself. Practice this daily. Begin small. Speak calmly, act with purpose, and when the moment comes, don't run from it. Rise to meet it. If this message resonated with you, I invite you to share a moment when you wished you had spoken, and what you learned from it. Your story could be the voice someone else has been waiting to hear.